Joining us now on the Megacast is Alia Harvey Quinn, the director of Force Detroit, with us once again on the program. Alia, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate having you on. So, of course, we've heard so much in recent times about gun violence in the United States, and especially we know about that being an issue in Detroit, here in Michigan, and other cities throughout our region. Your organization works very pointedly at addressing this issue at the community level, at the grassroots level. Can you tell us, for those that aren't familiar with the work of Force Detroit, give us a summary of what your organization does to combat gun violence?
Yeah, so our mission is really around creating a freer and safer Detroit. We connect directly impacted people, folks who are impacted by the criminal justice system, by violence, and by poverty, to opportunities to make justice-centered solutions and programmatic change as far as policy and programs.
And so, as you're addressing these issues, as you're doing so at the grassroots level with people in these communities that are being affected by some of these mass shootings and these gun violence occurrences, in our modern age, how much of a factor does social media play in those interventions at the community level?
Yeah, I mean, social media is a huge factor, and various forms of social media that you wouldn't expect. So people are now creating what is called drill music, which sort of documents tensions between two individuals or groups, and they're sharing those tensions. They're sharing their disdain for each other, and in extreme versions of these videos, they're sharing sort of their intent to physically harm each other. And then they're carrying those acts out in real life. And so you see these on YouTube, TikTok, and people's stories. It is difficult. So it's really, really important to monitor the social media of the community that we're engaged in so that we can notate escalating conflict as it develops. But it's also really important to counter some of this culture with joy, and joyful acts that are unanticipated, and brighten up our timelines so that they're not sort of gory and re-traumatizing our entire community.
And so when you have these messages that are going out over social media, these TikTok videos, these YouTube videos, these other postings on people's social media stories and so on, as you mentioned, how does your organization then take that into the intervention standpoint to have those important conversations, those mediary conversations that you often have in an attempt to mitigate the situation either after the fact or
Yeah,
prevent the issue from coming
yeah.
to blows altogether?
Yeah, social media can be incredibly useful in that, because a lot of times what we're negotiating is he said, she said interactions, whereas social media gives you something concrete. Like it concretizes, like, this is the back and forth. This is what you did to escalate it. This is what the other party did to escalate it. So in terms of disruption, it can be incredibly useful. It is just equally harmful, and it creates a broader audience that potentially also escalates the incident additionally.
We're joined by Alia Harvey Quinn, who is the director of Force Detroit, joining us on today's edition of the MegaCast. You can find more information on the organization and help them at forcedetroit.org. That's forcedetroit.org. Recently, the Whitmer administration for the 2022-2023 budget added $4.5 million to address gun violence at the state level. In less than 3 months, Detroit has been the site of at least 5 mass shootings. Your organization was one of many that had received some state funding for community violence interruption. How does that funding from the state level help your organization further to address these issues, as you're addressing them most commonly at the grassroots level? But that money can go a long way to helping intervention organizations like yours.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so happy you asked that question. We have a big vision for creating community violence intervention organizations and supporting those that already exist across the city. And so we are really asking for $150 million over 10 years to incubate this nonprofit landscape within the city of Detroit. What happens is if you begin to transform deeply young people or people involved in active cycles of violence on one side of town in one neighborhood, and you don't invest that same amount of energy in the other neighborhoods, then you leave community is sort of lopsided, and these communities are often in conflict with each other. And so you're teaching one set of people peace without teaching their opponents peace. This potentially gets them killed, right? And so we need to think about how we can truly scale this up across the city so that as we're building strengths in the red zone in the Cody Rouge area, we're also building strengths along the Davidson corridor on Puritan and Schaefer in East English Village. So so that people are, so that Detroit truly becomes whole in the long run.
ForceDetroit.org is their website for more information and ways that you can get involved in helping them prevent violence in the Detroit area. We're joined by Alia Harvey Quinn on the Megacast. She is the director of Force Detroit and joins us on today's program. And Alia, it's interesting that you bring up those mediary, those one-on-one kind of conversations between these two different parties often, or these multiple parties that are involved in some of this violence. For you and for your organization, as you're having those conversations, as you're going back and forth with whatever side of whatever argument may be ongoing, what often is that difference maker that kind of becomes that turning point in these conversations? That's the difference between an eruption of violence and maybe everybody kind of taking a step back and cooling down a little bit before they react to these situations.
Yeah, so I've learned from my team members, folks like, DeJuan Kennedy and Skrill, that the difference is also often something small and human, like the fact that they really want to be a father, or we've really got goals of going to school and becoming something better than what I am. So, like, the deeper the relationship, the more you can leverage something that is truly human, appeal to that, and inspire people to be a better version of themselves, and then use the resources that we've gathered to help them take at least one step along that path. Like, usually, if you just allow a person to be human with you, you will find out that they have children. They're concerned about their parents. They don't want their parents to be caught up in these cycles of violence, right? They don't want their family's houses shot up. They have aspirations that they haven't yet reached. So really, it depends on the relationship that you are able to build with the individuals, how deeply you can appeal to that higher part of them.
It's interesting, and it's really just remarkable that some of these just basic human connections can be the catalyst that pulls people back from the red line and from acting on some of these arguments in a violent manner. Do you find that in some cases that these interventions, that these human connections that you're finding to kind of tamper down the violence in these situations can actually end up forming new bonds between these groups in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you see all over the country and what's been documented in the research is that oftentimes people haven't had an opportunity to build a relationship with the group that they consider the opponent group, and they end up in a situation where they are building a relationship with them because they're attached to the same community violence intervention organization, and they may respect that individual and their principle, how they show up, the human parts of them, their leadership skills, more than they respect some of the people that they're in deeper long-term relationships with. So absolutely, friendships are created, new relationships, new bonds. But it's also about inspiring the person to become a better version of themselves, a higher version of themselves, to remember what they aspired to in their childhood, letting that shine through, and then people creating new connections based on that newly expressed beauty.
You can find more information on Force Detroit and join them in taking action against violence in Detroit by visiting forcedetroit.org. We're joined by Alia Harvey Quinn, the director of Force Detroit on the Megacast. Alia, just another minute or so with you before we need to say goodbye today. Anything else that you'd like to say about Force Detroit and your work that we haven't discussed today, or any messages for those out there in Detroit and in the local area on violence in their communities and ways that they can kind of get themselves back from that point of erupting into a full-scale conflict?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry about that. I think very, very importantly, we need to create mutual aid connections in our communities. We need to be in conversations with our neighbors, exchanging phone numbers, um, watching each other come and go, and just paying attention. Yesterday there was an active shooter in my neighborhood and actually on my block. And I found that I got the information early because the folks at the city who manage this work know to call, certain activists and organizations. And and I didn't have enough of my neighbors' information, like phone numbers, to communicate that they needed to be safe, they needed to stay in, they needed to. So it's very, very important that we are connecting with our neighbors and looking out for each other's well-being.
Well, Leah, we appreciate the work that you're doing, and thank you for all the interventions that you're making in Detroit to help these individuals and these groups come to some form of peace and form a greater community in their community. Appreciate it, Leah.
Thank you so much. It was good talking to you. You have a good day.